Awesome. I think we have everyone except for Claire. Do you know where Claire is, Faith?
Claire's not joining. She can't join the internet because she's out of range of
Ah,
the internet right now. She's traveling.
gotcha.
I've never heard that before.
Oh,
She
right on.
cannot
Well, good
join
for
the
Claire.
internet. We're out
Yeah.
of range of the internet.
Yeah, she's. I think she's in
Is
Zambia.
there such a thing?
I know. Does
Yeah,
that
it's
really
like,
happen
what
these
does that
days?
feel like?
Right. Well, wherever she's at, that's where I want to go. I want to be out of the range of the internet.
I think that's the new luxury. The new luxury is being out of range of internet. The new luxury is being
Yes.
offline.
Yes.
It's
I
definitely.
think we will get there. We're not there yet, but I think we will get there. Right now, the luxury is being online and being metaverse, either adjacent or being totally in the metaverse. But yeah, I do think at a future time we'll have saturated ourselves to the point where being offline will be the luxury. So, again, this is why I always say, look, it's great to be in the metaverse. Like, I'm a child of the internet, but you know what also is great? Property in the real world, real water, real clothes, real people. That's also great. I think we can do both. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it can be like an and situation. Anyways, good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m. in Austin. There were thunderstorms and flash flood warnings and tornado warnings yesterday in particular. So planes were grounded, and I am still here in Austin off of South by Southwest. Jeremy, you're in Texas. Did things get pretty
Yes.
weird in Dallas?
Yes, ma'am. I'm in Dallas, Texas, and yeah, my brother-in-law, his dad, he lives up like I don't know, like it's in a place where there's no other people, but he has a huge property, and his house got just basically ripped to shreds. And he's got a pretty massive like
Wow.
brick building, and with like a nice metal roof. And the pictures that came back were pretty scary. So I'm glad he was okay though.
Yeah, me
Gosh,
too. Yesterday
yeah.
in the Uber on the way to the airport, the car was lifted off the ground a little bit. And I was like, you know what? We probably should turn around and go back to the hotel. And then I,
Holy
of course,
crap!
got these emergency warnings on my phone. Even late last night, was woken up by the bah, bah, bah from emergency warning talking about flash floods. And yeah, was seeing like lightning in the middle of the night. It's pretty intense. So needless to say, I'm still here in Austin. But thankful to be alive, thankful to be in good health, and shout out to the Kimpton Hotel. They've been taking good care of me, and yeah, and having all this go down during Crypto Fashion Week isn't a bad scenario at all. I'm stoked to be welcomed or to be in company and conversation with Faith Robinson. Zofia, I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name. Well, maybe I will. Zwieglinska?
So it's like a V, so it's Zwieglinska, but very close. Thank
Zwieglinska.
you.
Okay, very cool. Zwieglinska. And Jeremy McKane, aka Mr. Ocean. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Stoked to be here.
Right on. So today's conversation is around sustainability and creativity. What I love about each of you is that, and I'll go through it briefly, and then I'll let you guys give a bit of background in your origin story on how you came to sustainability and the ways that you are now for your business, for your approach, for creativity. Mr. Ocean in particular, who's an artist, and how you came to NFTs. I know each of you have a different story around the origin of that at the intersection of fashion and sustainability, and I want to dig into it. But I'll just quickly, go through how I know you guys. So Mr. Ocean is a badass artist, first of all, and he's also a brilliant businessman when it comes to linking creativity, sustainability, and kind of like metaverse topics or NFT topics. I first discovered Mr. Ocean on Clubhouse. He was talking about sustainability. He was talking about the oceans and a project that he was working on to remove munitions from the ocean, and I thought it was brilliant. And from there, I've I've been hooked on pretty much everything he endeavors to do, and I support everything he endeavors to do. I think that his approach to the NFT space is super refreshing, and one that will hopefully create good relations between sustainability and what we think about as NFTs right now. There's a lot of talk around NFTs being not being sustainable. So I'd love for you, Jeremy, to also speak to that. With Zofia, she has chosen to be one of the brave journalists that is writing about NFTs and the metaverse from the point of sustainability and creativity, but also kind of like realistically, like, don't just get stuck on the hype. I know her to be someone who's researching both sides and all sides and looking to give a fair account and balanced account of what's happening in the space. So definitely appreciate the work she's doing at Glossy. And then with Faith and I came into contact when she was doing some research for Berlin's Sustainability Council. She was doing research around fashion and creativity and looking to kind of understand what was out there, who was out there, how folks were thinking about sustainability long term, how folks were thinking about their position in the metaverse as sustainability is concerned, but also as community is concerned. So really love the work that Faith is doing. And yeah, happy to be here with you guys. Now that I've given this kind of brief overview of how we're connected, I would love for you all, starting with Jeremy, to give the audience your origin story and what you're doing in the space now and how you came to the space.
Well, thanks for that. First of all, some props need to be sent over to you because you are absolutely one of the most loveliest people that I have met in this entire NFT experience, and so it's really heartwarming to hear you say those nice things about me, because the feeling is mutual, my friend. Yeah, I think for me, it's always been about, as an artist, it's always been about how, I guess thinking about like, am I making good art? Am I making bad art? And I remember one time thinking to myself, I need to really think about how do we make people feel? And I think that's really, if we've got down to the grassroots of like everything art, it pulls emotions out from us. And so, I've always gone to try to find ways to make the unseen seen. And especially when it comes to the ocean, it's a space that's so big, it's not visited by everybody. And so as an artist, I have this capability to use a platform to get people to feel how amazing the ocean is. My background didn't start with the ocean, though. I started in tech, and in early 1990s, I was basically a college dropout, and I started working for this tech company that, in a very short amount of time, became one of the world's largest web host providers. But in that process, I became a little jaded. I saw a lot of things that were happening in the .com era that I also see that happen in this space. And so I've been able to adopt a lot of the lessons learned from that period of time to what we're doing now. But I think, just from an origin standpoint, I think it really kind of, I kind of come back and say, like, well, what are we going to do? We have tools, but sometimes when you have a hammer, all you're doing is looking for a nail. I think the tools that we've been provided right now give us the capability to really extend beyond our senses. If I have 5 senses, but now the metaverse and then NFTs give us maybe a 6th or 7th sense, then what does our new world look like? And I think that's the thing that I try to kind of conceptualize, not just in my artwork, but also my company, OCN.ai. The whole purpose in what we do is to measure things so that we can improve them. And Lady's right. When I first started doing this, I was already working kind of in the NFT space, not because I really wanted to, but this guy William and Tricken and Cody Marks Bailey, they were actually writing this thing called EIP 721. And they were telling me about the idea of having a non-fungible token. And there's some things in life that just don't need to be divided, And so we came up with an idea of like, what if we could take oceanic data and actually treat them as digital core samples? And that way, once it's written on chain, it is the truth. Because at the end of the day, when someone asks you, what is blockchain? It's a very simple response. You can say blockchain, all blockchain really is a network of truth and transparency. It only gets written when everyone else confirms that transaction actually happened. But we often think of that in the crypto space. But what happens if we actually say, hey, the temperature is 22 degrees centigrade, and then 500,000 machines verify that it is in fact 22 degrees, then it must be the truth. And so I try to take data and then also art and say, well, how can we quantify this understanding of our natural world so that we can do something about it? And Lady mentioned munitions. Last year, we were able to get the state of Hawaii to pass a resolution to remove chemical weapons and conventional weapons from their waters. And I feel like that could be the beacon of change for the rest of the world. But one of the ways that I'm really working to do this with nominated Grammy-nominated artist BT is to try to get a following of people that not only can collect work, they can talk about the work, but it also at some point can be the funding mechanism. But it's not just about the funding. Anyway, I guess to wrap it all up, I really feel that at the end of the day, like we're missing the mark on so many pieces of understanding when it comes to our natural environment. We stick to our silos because it's what we know best. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, today I think I'm going to destroy the planet. And on the topic of the sustainability thing, Lady, you're right. I constantly because I'm in the conservation space, I'm constantly getting barraged by, oh, you're in NFTs, but it doesn't make sense because you're damaging the environment. In fact, yesterday somebody referred to it as snake oil. I was on a call with about, 20 people. I shut it down pretty quickly. And we can talk about that if you want to, but I think it's interesting that if we're going to report on the technology and how it works, I think we need to separate the facts from fiction, but we also need to tell the whole truth and not the half truths. And so I think we're in this really interesting time though. And I think if we can kind of get the story straight, we can really define those tools, kind of like what I was saying before. And I think we have a real chance of creating something that's really impactful, that has the capability of doing something really powerful. But yeah, I'm happy to just kind of carry on a dialogue, but that's kind of how I got started in all this business.
Thank you so much. I'm obviously I think I'm the only journalist on the panel, but I've been covering the NFT and metaverse space for about a year now, maybe a little bit more. I've been kind of covering digital fashion for a lot longer. In my role as the international reporter for Glossy, I'm kind of focused on technology and sustainability. And it was something that I really wanted outlined in my role when I started, because I thought that sustainability and technology was something that go hand in hand, and whether that's NFTs, the metaverse, or more kind of physical technologies that can help with fashion production, with making things smoother, easier, more ethical, and more sustainable. That's just been something that I've cared about a lot since starting writing, and even before that, to be honest. So I've been covering NFTs and the metaverse across different subjects, from launches to the kind of ethical quandaries of it, and to sustainability, because I think that's something that's still not covered enough by journalists specifically. The differences between proof of work, proof of stake, and also the kind of good initiatives that come out of it, the ones that are not purely driven by hype and by a mad rush for money. I think that's something that isn't covered enough in the media, and I kind of take my role quite seriously with that in mind. There's, I think, maybe 3 or 4 journalists covering the space within fashion, and I think it's something that definitely needs to be covered more as a kind of linking bridge between sustainability and technology, rather than something that is, as you said, Jeremy, is in separate kind of silos.
Damn, I'm really interested by what you were both saying, and it's great to meet you. And echoing Jeremy, thank you so much for organizing this, Lady Phe. It's really exciting. My origin story for this is an interesting and winding path, like most people's with this space. I have a background in art history, and I'm currently partway through a master's degree in degrowth economics, policy, and ecology, which is pretty fascinating. But in my career, I guess my work has been very focused on the intersection of fashion and sustainability and innovation in lots of different ways. And there's just so many nuggets to jump into with what you were both talking about. I was just making some notes when you were both talking. Jeremy, I loved your interest and focus on tools. And I think that, especially in the fashion industry with the focus on brands, when it comes to sustainability, brands aren't really like celebrating or communicating or giving their communities tools to be part of positive change. They work on their own initiatives internally, start communicating it in different ways. But when will we all be able to take part in tools that can help conserve natural environments or help different kinds of people? That question is where I get quite excited looking at Web3 and the metaverse and NFTs, because I find the utility in all of it very compelling when it comes to measuring impact and improving things. So I'm really grateful for the work of journalists like you, Zofia, for getting into the nuance of it all, because you're right, fashion isn't really looking at this very seriously yet. And I guess there's lots of reasons for that. It's just very exciting to think about like how we can use these tools in ways that we can't imagine yet. So yeah, a lot of my work is really in consulting with brands from their ethical engagement strategies through to their sustainability work. So that's really how I come into the space, and I guess I see myself as a researcher with a real interest in creative and the analytical part of all this. So I'm quite interested by this conversation because we all come from such different places, it seems.
We need all of the perspectives, so I'm happy for the different places, so to speak, that everyone is coming from. Faith, it sounded like you had some questions pretty immediately for Jeremy and Zofia. I'd love for you to kick it off. How we've been doing these discussions is that it's more like a round table. It isn't just a bunch of talking heads and me asking questions. I would love for you all as creatives, as people doing the work in the space, to engage with one another and feel free to ask questions of one another.
Okay, great. I love that format. Okay, let's see. So, Jeremy, maybe please could you tell us a bit more about how you started working with environmental data with the oceans? Did that come first, or did the art come first? And I guess why the ocean?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I would say it came with the art first. It's funny because years ago, it's so funny you said there's nuggets. I think all of us have little nuggets that sometimes, we have in our life. I think it was Steve Jobs that once said that, you don't really know the steps that you take in life until you've made them and you look back and it makes sense. But at the time it doesn't make sense. Like why would he take a typography or calligraphy class before he was getting into computers? But now you see how it all makes sense when you look at the design of the Macintosh. I actually started photographing in the water because I love the water. I love being in the water. To me, that's home. So I would, and then I also loved photography. And so I remember one time I was asked to do a runway shoot for this brand, and I'm photographing these models coming down the runway, like I'd done 100 times before. I was really bored, and I remember going to the fashion designer that night. I said, I have this crazy idea. This is maybe 2008. I said, what if I took my models with your looks and put them underwater? She didn't like the idea too much, but I figured maybe it's just a law of averages. So I'll ask some people. And so I got somebody to make some dresses and put them underwater. And that really was kind of like my foray into all this, was doing this underwater fashion thing. And I got bored again doing it in the pool all the time. And then I started going into the ocean, and that's when things really changed for me. I mean, the putting girls and guys in the shore break, and having these waves crash behind them was always really awesome to see. But then I was always running into plastic, and I'm thinking, far out, man, somebody should do something about this. This is ridiculous. And then I had kind of an awakening one time when I was in Australia, prepared to do a shoot, uh, that I'm an artist. Like, if I can't do something about it, then we're all screwed. So what if I use my platform? And so I just started doing that. But then when I started asking some pretty, there's simple questions, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. I realized that we didn't have a lot of data about things. And so this became my quest to really try to understand more about the ocean, and more of what could be done from an art perspective to get maybe people to do things. And why the ocean, you ask? Well, quite simply, every second breath that we breathe right now comes from the ocean. So whether we're in Dallas, Texas, or Austin, Texas, we're breathing thanks to the ocean. The ocean is also the world's carbon sink, thanks to mangroves and seagrass and kelp forests. And without those things, we're hosed. And unfortunately, when I say it's important to make the unseen seen, that's really the mission that we need to have with the ocean. Because if we have, if we want a super weapon for climate change, then this is the key right here. The ocean is the super weapon, but unfortunately, our super weapon's kind of broken. We really need to figure out the best ways to take the human element out a little bit, so it has a chance to regenerate. And so that's the reason why I focused on the ocean. I feel like if we have a chance at this, this is the target that we need to have.
I love that story. It reminds me of, well, it makes me remember how it feels to just like be floating in the water. And I feel like that's such a privilege for anyone to do, and it's such a peaceful thing to imagine. And that stillness is very soothing when we're in digital spaces. So I'm really into that. And then something else you said, I've been thinking a lot recently about how like the ocean or mangroves or different natural spaces like you were talking about, they're so in like corporate fashion sustainability, these spaces are kind of like referred to as nature-based solutions, as solutions that we can lean on to help ourselves. But I find that language so interesting sometimes, because it implies that nature is like only useful in its utility to humans, So there's that feeling of reciprocity I get from your work that I really appreciate. And it's kind of interesting to see how sustainability kind of like uses nature as a solution rather than honors nature as as an energy.
I've never quite thought about it that way before, and you're spot on about that. It's quite funny because now that you've mentioned this, it makes me think that really nature is nature. If it's the solution, then that means that humans are the problems. Therefore, that death to humans could also be the solution. Not to get too dark, but really, like, it's us. That if you look at any time that we get involved someplace, that's when things get messed up. For those that are listening to this who want kind of to go down the rabbit hole, a really interesting story was done, or a case study was done by Mission Blue. The founder of Mission Blue is Dr. Sylvia Earle. She was the first female director of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And she's also a very good friend of mine. And one year I was sitting with her, and she told me about Cabo Pulmo. That's spelled CABOPULMO. I'm proud that I could actually just do that because I am dyslexic and I do misspell things quite often, but that is the correct spelling. But what's interesting is that they had no fish. They had nothing, right? And the locals, with the politicians, with the fishermen, all said, you know what, let's actually just create a no-take zone. And they did so for 15 years. And when Sylvia went back to dive the site 15 years later, she said, Jeremy, she goes, the jacks had returned, the sharks had returned, the turtles had returned. The sharks, there's bigger sharks than what they were before. She goes, it was like the ocean was that I remember 50 years prior. And it just goes to show you, if we just remove, we don't have to remove for a very long time, but if we can remove humans out of certain areas, this is why something that is really important right now. It's an initiative that I've been focused on for quite some time. It's the protection of 30% of the ocean by 2030. That's the magic number that gets us to regenerate. But as it relates to fashion and all these other kinds of things, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about kind of siloing off. It's like we do these things not realizing that we're having an effect on the next person and the next person. It's kind of like a negative butterfly effect.
That's really interesting. I've never really thought about the kind of effect that would have, and it's so interesting to see so many people from the fashion space kind of divert into different fields. I don't know if Faith and Jeremy, if you guys have kind of felt like that too, that there's kind of a bigger interest now in more kind of wider interest pools for people within fashion, but it's definitely something that I've noticed, and I'd love to kind of find out a little bit more about what that kind of means for the future of this industry. Maybe this is specific to or too specific to fashion, but it's just something that I would be interested in.
Yeah, I can speak on that a little bit. So in sustainable fashion, I guess like generally from a corporate brand point of view, more so than an artistic point of view, this kind of like focus on biodiversity as a core pillar of sustainability strategy is something that the industry still really grapples with, because I think that especially so many of us like working in corporate businesses or even just living in the global north just feel so separate from nature, and that means that has so many weird implications for how we work with nature. So what I've noticed in the sustainability space, which is predominantly where I work in fashion, is like this weird grappling with the language. Is it biodiversity? Is it conservation? What are we talking about here? Is it water use, energy, chemicals, all of it? It's such a holistic thing to work on, nature. So yeah, it's like, how do you make a strategy around that, and also how do you make it interesting and feel like a really embodied human topic? That's why I love what Crypto Fashion Week doing with the beautiful visuals, with the ocean. Like, yes, like I want to feel like part of this, not separate from it with the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the digital so far has been a lot kind of removed from reality. It's talking about, other worlds, when it could be focusing on what we have here and kind of helping the existing problems here. And I think that kind of escapism can be quite, I wouldn't say damaging, but it can be quite reductionist to kind of put it to just escapism, because it can be so much more.
I think there's another element to this too, where it's like, I mean, when we talk about kind of fast fashion and the impact that it's having on the planet, sometimes we like to point back at the consumer, saying, "Hey, you shouldn't go shopping at H&M or Zara or whatever these other groups are," right? But really, is that our problem? I mean, I think at the end of the day, there are maybe, I don't know, 100,000 people that have influence over 8 billion people on this planet. If we have to wait for 8 billion of our brothers and sisters to do the right thing, sad to say it, I think we're all dead. But I do think that 100,000 people, like the CEOs of Zara, the CEO of H&M, they can make some pretty nominal decisions that can make some profound effect on all of the consumers that would come through their shops, and thereby creating a massive impact positively for the planet. It really always comes back down to the bottom line. It comes down to, oh, is this too expensive? Could we actually do this? But then when we calculate that bottom line, we're looking at it on an Excel spreadsheet, but we don't necessarily value what a healthy ecosystem is. And if we could quantify that healthy ecosystem from a financial standpoint and what that actually meant about not just the company, but the rest of the individuals as a whole, then maybe we would make some different decisions.
Oof, I would love to jump in on that. Do you mind, Sophia? Can I just say something? Is that like we forget how connected we are. Like I'm here in Switzerland right now, and I'm surrounded by the mountains with snow on. But there was some different kind of prevailing wind that brought all of the, well, not all of the sand, but a lot of sand from the Sahara into the Alps here, turning all of the white covered mountains this kind of pink shade of orange. And it really, something about what you were just saying really just like that image of you know, like how ecologies around the world are connected, we just forget. And especially from a financial point of view, like we need things like art, like visual reminders to prompt people, whether that's consumers or leaders. Like I really liked your point. I really liked your point, Jeremy. Zofia, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a very, very interesting perspective to see it as something that kind of brands need to get involved in. I was kind of thinking about it while you're talking about how can like digital technologies get involved with that and kind of help that. Because I think a lot of the times you're right, they're talking about you know, the bottom line, about kind of finance, about, you know, annual reports, and it gets very much down to the business end of things. But a lot of these brands also rely on natural resources for their own production. So even if you are talking about finances, if you don't take care of the things that, you know, you're currently surrounded in, it's also going to have an impact on that bottom line too. And I guess in that respect, what do you think the kind of digital technologies could do to help that, apart from kind of quantifying the impact of what a healthy kind of ecosystem could do for the population and for brands too?
You know, I think one of the things, you know, we kind of mentioned it already, is about, you know, not just quantifying it from a financial standpoint, but also, you know, really truly understanding what's out there. I mean, Lord Kelvin said it best: if you want to improve something, you must first measure it, right? And I think like we're not effectively measuring a lot of things to really make a big enough impact. So I think that's probably one of the things that I would think of mostly. And I think with digital technologies, I feel like, you know, of course, a lot needs to still be proven, but I feel like we have the capability of really better understanding kind of what that impact is. I mean, we measure success based off of unlimited economic growth, but how can you have unlimited economic growth with limited natural resources? That's the part that I think that all of us need to be in tune with and understand.
Yeah, definitely. I do think there's been a lot more of that, and you know, talking to brands and the kind of representatives from them, they've all said that the reason why a lot of this is happening is because of the fact that they are trying to make sure that they can keep up with production at the same time, which I don't know, I still find it quite baffling. And I'm interested in the kind of theories on degrowth in that aspect. I don't know, Faith, obviously you said that you were doing um your academics was in degrowth. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about that and kind of how that relates to sustainability and the digital space as well.
Yes, I'm so glad that we can talk about this. It's such a elephant in the room in so many sustainability spaces. So I'm grateful for Jeremy to bring it up so clearly like that. It's such a massive issue. My entry point into degrowth theory was being at a big fashion fashion sustainability conference. And you know, in the networking part where you kind of like have small talk with people over coffee or whatever, I was with a group of people. So it's usually where the most interesting facets or insights come from, and it certainly was in my case, because I was overhearing and just standing next to a group of people from like a big fashion conglomerate group, and they were just so cynical for good reason. They were just talking, well, they were kind of like shrugging their shoulders and saying, oh, it's crazy that all of our sustainability work this year has been completely undermined by the growth of the business. And that one comment just completely turned, I don't know, like, not to be too dramatic or anything, but it really changed my life, because like how is that conversation not on the main stage of every sustainability conference in any industry, you know? So so I got really interested in the theory, and I'm trying to become very well versed in what the alternatives are, because our society has been brainwashed by a couple hundred years of capitalism and neoliberalism. And the thing is that it doesn't have to be like this. Like, to what Jeremy was saying about measuring success, what a great thing to interrogate. There are all sorts of alternatives to measuring prosperity. We could look at a well-being society. We could measure an industry's success on how much impact it has. It's really complicated when it links to finances, of course, but that's why I'm interested in Web3 and crypto, because it offers the tools, and it offers kind of like a roadmap for a post-growth community, for a community that's not ruled by conglomerates, and a space where we don't have to rely on brands for funding, which is especially exciting for me in a creative sense. So that's another reason why I really appreciate Crypto Fashion Week and these conversations, because they really center creativity in a way that I think is really healthy for the industry. But we're not really there yet with degrowth policy or anything like that in fashion industries. But things like rental, resale, and of course NFTs and digital fashion really contribute to this idea of a steady state economy, where things go round and round instead of going up and up, you know? So I'm interested to see what you guys think about how circularity perhaps links to digital fashion.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, there's a friend of mine who's starting a fashion brand that is focused on basically the reusing of textiles. And she had mentioned to me that, you know, sometimes she'll go out and be like, wow, you look amazing. Where did you get that jacket? Where did you get those shoes? And she'll tell them, oh, I got them at Goodwill. And the looks, and people will go, oh, you know, and sometimes people might be going, oh, that's too bad because I really wanted that. I know I can't go to Goodwill and get that exact thing. Other times they're kind of looking down upon it, right? It's like, so there's almost kind of a cultural shift, you know? So I love what you're saying, because I think part of what I think needs to happen is we need to make it cool. We need to make it cool to recycle some of this stuff, because I mean, there's a place that I've been wanting to go, which you guys are probably very familiar with, but I've been to Chile several times, but I haven't been to the Atacama Desert. And the Atacama Desert apparently has a ton of unused fabrics and fashion that they've just dumped into the desert. I want to go see that, right? You know, it's the same thing that I did with plastics. I wanted to go to the dirtiest places that I could find in the world so that I could really grasp how heavy this is, because again, like, you know, we don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to go buy some clothes and I'm going to destroy the planet. Like, no, I just want to look good, man. I want people to think that I look fly. So I think that's I think we just need to figure out how to change that messaging, and it's been done before. I just don't think it has been done on a massive scale, and you know, to really achieve the goal that you want. But I'm all ears. I'm happy to jump on this train.
Yeah, definitely. And me too. I think that circularity in general is something that is really difficult for brands to do. And I think there's been a lot of conversations about how they are supposed to implement it. But essentially, circularity is something that within fashion production, at least, is extremely difficult to retrofit. And it makes a lot of sense for younger businesses who can kind of be very agile and shift production to do it in a circular fashion way. I think there's brands that I've talked about before, like Hilos, for example, who do have a circular system, and I think they just won something at South by Southwest. And I think that that's something that, you know, should be pushed a lot more by the industry. And it's still something that is very, very niche. A lot of the time, people don't want to read about circularity. So for media agencies, it can also feel quite difficult to kind of get the point across. And then there's also, you know, the impact of kind of the secondhand clothing market is still not having, I would say, enough of an effect on fashion designers who also kind of lead the industry in terms of what they should be doing. I mean, we've just closed up with, you know, another season of fashion weeks, and there's there's been a few, I would say, it's still a growing number, but not enough in terms of how many designers actually implement a secondhand practice or using secondhand materials in their collections. And I think it's still something that is seen as a trend rather than something that should be implemented as a widespread practice and used to kind of lead the industry forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like that's so. I didn't know that people didn't want to read about circularity so much. That's so interesting, and it's weird because there's such a depth of storytelling to be done there. Really interesting stories, but I also appreciate the point and what you both mentioned about circularity for physical garments is like fashion sustainability is an environmental justice issue. It's a human rights issue. There's so many injustices that go, unnoticed or people kind of like know they're happening and don't do anything at a leadership level. And I feel like maybe one of the next question could be like, how does digital fashion evade some of those issues, and does it? Or will, I guess I'm sometimes scared that some of the same issues in physical fashion will manifest into the digital world, and I wonder what you both think about that.
I mean, well, then this kind of goes into what Lady Phe was kind of talking about, or asked us to kind of bring up anyway, is kind of some of the environmental impact of, the digital space. I mean, I think it's like, one could ask the question, it's like, oh, are we going from, well, let's say that everybody becomes circular and we all recycle all of our clothes, which would be an amazing thing to do. But then all of a sudden this massive thing starts to kick off in the metaverse and we're all trading NFTs for digital wearables and things like that. And it's like, are we just pushing off the inevitable? And I'd be curious to hear how you guys, I mean, I know how I respond to the energy consumption issue, but I would love to hear maybe Faith, some of the things that you usually say to people to kind of set the record straight, because I feel like there's the record definitely needs to be set straight at the moment.
Yeah, this is a really important point. I'm still kind of like trying to perfect my script on this one, to be honest. But I feel like it's good to point out the kind of class barriers that are a big part of the digital fashion and Web3 metaverse space in general. Like it's not everyone that's engaging in this space. It's very, very few people, very few privileged people who have access to it. So that sometimes makes me, I kind of sometimes use that point to deflect from the impact that people seem to imagine. And then also, I'm just yet to find really, really good data on the energy consumption of this space. And I do understand that there's quite a big difference between digital fashion that's blockchain based and digital fashion that's not. So I'm still on the lookout for data that can really help kind of like embolden me in my response to this criticism. And I do work in a space where people are super critical, just like what you were saying. As soon as you mention those words, people are rolling their eyes or whatever. But the final thing I'll mention on that is that digital fashion is often used as a sustainability solution for like digital sampling. And that's one of those low-hanging fruit things that fashion brands who are new to sustainability address first. They use digital samples to replace physical garments during the R&D phase of the business, and that can reduce the brand's carbon footprint by quite a lot. So those are the things that I think about. What about you, Zofia, on that point? It's a great question.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you on the data aspect. One of my kind of main tasks as a journalist is finding and using accurate data on this, and there's still nothing when it comes to the kind of widespread impact of digital fashion. You do have some data on the kind of proof of work and proof of stake systems when it comes to NFTs. But I think that, as an industry, if you're talking about it as, digital collections spring up you know, on an almost daily basis, you have to think about what the impact is there, and whether within each of these kind of companies that are pushing digital fashion forward, if there is also a possibility of bringing the kind of companies together to create some kind of widespread data, I don't know, project or something that would be able to amass all of it together, because I think that would be really important to kind of solidify how fashion and, you know, the wider fashion industry should respond. But I think the fact that you see so many players in the space now shows that it is definitely something that people do think about. And I'm actually the same as you, Faith. I'm very much interested in seeing how digital sampling and kind of the pre-production, I guess, or pre-consumer production can be addressed in a digital way, whether that's through digital avatars, which could also help consumers reduce their returns, to, you know, digital sampling, which can help companies reduce their carbon footprint and kind of make sure that, in terms of production at least, that they are not adding anything new until it's absolutely, well, absolutely necessary is a little bit of a funny word here, until a consumer would be ready to purchase. So I think that that's something that, you know, there's so many different kind of digital technology applications that are still not being applied in a universal way. And a lot of the people that I talk to are still waiting for the big players to kind of make those steps forward. Essentially, it's a follow, you know, the leader kind of scenario here.
Yeah, I asked this question because, I mean, this seems like a good place to have a dialogue without a diatribe, you know, and I feel like that's what happens sometimes when we bring this particular topic up. It just gets so heated and polarized, and I do think that, you know, your point about bringing in data, I think it would be really important to really understand that perspective. I know that when COVID hit and none of us knew what was going on, I my way of getting past fears is education. And I downloaded enormous amounts of data, tried to figure out how old people were when they died and how did they die. You know, I just wanted to make sense out of it, you know. And I think for this, I'm the same way. I'm like, okay, well, so, you know, proof of work uses this much, proof of stake uses this much, but how much does all the data centers that hold all of our Facebook content, all of our YouTube content, like, how, you know, if we got rid of all the petrol cars on the road and we all went electric, well, how much energy would that use? Where would we get it from? How would we store it? I think if we start to really look at things in perspective and truly understand it, and not just take little sound bites from some things in here, and I applaud you, Zofia, what you're doing, because I feel like a lot of journalists that I respect and love at The Guardian specifically and the New York Times have maybe done their work, but not finished the work, because a lot of times blockchain and digital technologies are reported on, I think, you know, just little bits and pieces here. And I feel like if you could really tell the whole story, by gathering all this data and showing it in this perspective, it would put things in a much different light. Is it perfect? No. In fact, Satoshi Nakamoto even describes the Bitcoin experiment as an experiment. It's an experiment that's gone rogue for 10 years plus. So, you know, we're learning as we go. But it's also the same kind of issue that I have with driving a Tesla. Tesla is not the most environmentally car that you could possibly have. Ironically, the most environmentally friendly car you can have is a Jeep Wrangler. Google that one day. That's a rabbit hole that you're gonna be like, wow, I didn't realize this. But what's interesting about this is that the electric revolution is the way to go. And if we're not buying Teslas, we're not buying electric cars, then we're not going to be innovating for batteries, because it's the battery technology that really needs to be perfected. And so I think it's also the same thing with all of this. You know, I just think that sometimes as humans, we want a silver bullet. We want to say, hey, what's the thing that I can do that's going to make it all better? But we didn't get here because we did one thing. You know, there was 8 billion people on the planet. 8 billion people are making bad decisions every single day. That's why we are where we are. But what if we made good decisions once a week? How much better would this place be? It all comes back down to perspective, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. I really, sorry, go on, Zofia.
No, go ahead, Faith.
I was just gonna echo what you're saying there, Jeremy, because I think one thing we haven't really touched on in this amazing conversation is the kind of spiritual or emotional or even moral weight of some of these decisions. And when it comes to creating digital environments, you know, like we can go down the economic data modeling route, and we should, but we also need to look inside ourselves, to your point, Jeremy, and find some sense of alignment, find some sense of balance, be in tune with how we connect to the rest of the cosmos, and understand that whatever is digital comes from something physical, and perhaps everything that comes from something physical comes from something a little bit more spiritual or energetic. And I sometimes, or like I often feel like fashion forgets about like the spiritual side of things, and how our well-being informs our good decisions, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just gonna say, that's such a great point. Not something that I've really thought about a lot, but I suppose in a certain kind of way. I mean, I don't know about everybody. I mean, I don't know how you guys look at this, but I mean, I think for me, um, fashion. This sounds horrible, but fashion is a spiritual thing, as is art, right? For me, it's another form of communication, right? I mean, of course, there's just the fashion of you can say somebody has fashion sense because they're wearing utility based clothes, right? Like a police officer or a fireman, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, I feel like I like shoes. Anybody that knows me knows that I love shoes, and I love frames, glasses, and there's certain little things that bring out this expression. And I think whenever I go into a place, I'm gonna buy something and I'm gonna wear it. It's not because I need a jacket so much as it's sometimes I just I want to be flashy. What can I say? But the same thing is kind of true too, right? With art and the way that we create work and we put it out there. It's like there's a certain feeling that as an artist you're trying to get out there because you might not necessarily have that uh, verbally, or even if you did, it gets lost in translation. And so, um, whenever I look at this stuff, I think, okay, well, amazing that we're talking about the environmental component, but we mustn't sacrifice while we're trying to redesign what the future looks like. We mustn't sacrifice the spiritual component to your point, because I feel like in a lot of conversations that I've had with people across a number of different countries, I don't think that we're communicating like we should, and therefore we don't necessarily have the empathy that we need I like to refer to us all as brothers and sisters on the planet because we're all the same. We just don't get the same we don't get the same equality. But I think at times, just looking into all of this, I've run into trouble or frustrations because I've met people who are amazing artists, but they don't have the capabilities to kind of put that out there. And so you brought up a point about talking about digital fashion and talking about blockchain. Not everybody has that particular ability to do that. So I don't know. I'm rambling, but I don't. This is also the problem, right? Like this is the reason why we are artists. Like I can explain something visually, but sometimes when we get into this element of the conversation, it's really hard to convey those emotions.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite interesting that there are kind of in my space specifically, there are reporters who are kind of sitting at the intersection of different subjects and topics now. You've got Whitney Bauk, who's at the Financial Times, and before that she was covering spirituality and sustainability in the same kind of vein. And I think it's something that needs to be done a lot more. I think that idea of kind of an eco positive situation rather than always talking about eco anxiety and kind of how the kind of doom of what the kind of climate situation is can also be something that can spur people towards change. And obviously it's something that I personally have a lot of an issue with, because in my role as a reporter, I am supposed to be objective. I'm not supposed to take sides, and I'm also supposed to be very accurate. And I think that that's something that, it's really hard to do nowadays. It's not the same as it was before, where you can simply, kind of log off, or finish up whatever article I'm writing, and that will be it. Like, essentially all of this bleeds into every other aspect of our lives, and I think that that's something that is still not as connected as it should be. I think it still needs to be so much more widespread, and I'm really happy that there is more of a push towards that, but it does need to expand a lot more.
Guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. We're coming to the top of the hour, and so I wanted to open it up for the audience. But I had a question. In listening to you guys, there was kind of this, I guess I don't know where you stand. A lot of times when speaking about the metaverse and NFTs, people speak about it as if folks are lucky to have this knowledge, or lucky to have the opportunity to participate in the metaverse. I'd like to hear from each of you your position on that and your understanding of that. I'll start by sharing mine. I don't really care for how the discussion leans towards, hey, if you aren't doing NFTs, if you don't have an avatar, if you're not in on this metaverse language and activity, if you don't have a condo in the metaverse and one of these, Decentraland, CryptoVoxel, Sandbox, what have you, then there's something missing in your education. It's strange to me that involving people in this space is positioned that way. I think that, and I mentioned this yesterday, there have been people on this earth for a very long time. There are different types of metaverses. It was mentioned about spirituality. I think there have been metaverses that folks have been tapping into for a very long time that never involved software and hardware. And I feel like that understanding of indigenous cultures who have long dealt with technology, simply not in the dense form that we know technology to be now, they aren't a part of the conversation or a part of the consideration for how for how we think about metaverse and the definitions we apply to metaverse. In fact, their definition or their understanding is not it's just not considered in a little bit, right? That's concerning for me. I don't think that we are lucky for having this metaverse understanding. I don't think we're lucky for participating in NFTs. And I'm curious to know what you all feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. I don't think that it's an issue of being lucky, but I do think that, you know, not everyone has the capability of accessing it. But for that matter, there's things that I don't have access to. I look at metaverse NFTs as a tool just like anything else. And I think that, I think the point of bringing up spirituality, I mean, and even what they call the Dreamtime stories in Australia, the Aboriginal people that have figured out how to survive out there for, in some cases the Bradshaw people date back to 30,000 years. I look at all of this as a, not an opportunity, but a space to innovate. Is it better than what's been out there for thousands of years? Not necessarily, but I do think that it potentially could get a certain subset of people, in my opinion, for the way I'm looking at things, to look at the world in a different way that perhaps they were blind to. And the very part that they were blind to might make a positive impact on the planet. And then that's kind of how I look at this. But I don't think I've never once thought that anyone's lucky because they have access to it. I know a lot of people who have access to NFTs and the metaverse, and they haven't been lucky. They've tried to do things and they come up empty-handed. So I think, I think it's a medium, just like anything else in an artist's arsenal.
Faith, do you want to go?
Sure. What an important question. I've just been listening to Jeremy and thinking about my response carefully, and I think I guess it depends what people mean when they say metaverse, because all human beings have access to dreams, to creation, to visions manifesting. Yet I do think that there's a conversation around access to the digital metaverse in the context that I think we've been talking about it for the last hour, in that having access to technology is so much of a class issue on the one hand, but also a time issue. I think that you have to have some, if you're engaging in this space for the first time, you have to make time to learn. And maybe the real privilege here is the education that is necessary to participate in some of these digital spaces that I certainly take part in. So I would like to think more about the question, and I appreciate it being asked.
Faith, can I push back on you on something you said? You said that
Please.
it's a class issue and an issue about access to technology. I think the assumption in the Western world is that technology is hardware and software only, and that access to the hardware and software that is a new invention in the span of history and in the full context of cultures, especially the global majority, that's the privilege. And what I'm positing is that maybe there's a privilege in choice, in seeing that, having knowledge or education that exists, and choosing to remain with what has been forever, right? With the understanding that forever was here before today, and forever will persist. Today will come and go. If my dream time as an indigenous person on the land now called Australia, if my dream time as a technology and as a metaverse has been working for over 50,000 years, why would I need to tap into the metaverse that is from today, right? And only accessible through hardware and software. If we all have access to dreams, and the dreaming is the one luxury we share as a human family, one that doesn't involve class, one that doesn't involve time, one that doesn't segregate based on any of the isms, then wouldn't that be the area that I want to focus on? I'm saying it from the eye, that's the area that Lady PheOnix wants to focus on. I'd rather double down on the technology that's been here forever and the one that unifies all humans and doesn't make a respecter of persons. I enjoy taking part in the metaverse. I have two nicknames, the Oracle of NFTs and Mother of the Metaverse, which I think is really kind, that I got from my days on Clubhouse, from basically setting the wave of the culture of NFTs and community that we know today, sans the broisms and the DeFi douchebags. And so as somebody now kind of stepping back from that creation or that birthing of the culture, I'm looking at how we can involve the technologies that have been here forever, again, with the understanding that forever was here before today, and today will come and go, but forever will persist. The people who have created these forever technologies know something that we don't, which is why there's no waste with what they participate in. There's no ism with what they participate in. And it's something that's universal to all human beings, all beings in general. You'll notice that maybe even your cat and dog enter dreamland, into the metaverse, right? And so when we go into the metaverse of our dreams, we usually are there working things out, whether it be our next invention, whether it's like how to make peace with our loved one after an argument, or, how to do whatever, fill in the blank, right? I don't know what goes on in everybody else's metaverse. But also in these metaverses, you can join people there, right? It's not just you dreaming. People have understood ways of meeting a friend, a loved one, a shaman, a deceased loved one. It's a social place, right? So again, what I'm positing is that we shouldn't, I don't want to say shouldn't, what I'm positing is that there may be benefits in considering the technologies from the cultures that represent the global majority that have been here forever. In the way that we think about today's technologies, if it's missing the ancestral understanding or missing the knowledge from its predecessor, then I think we'll always be incomplete with what we come up with, because it's missing some of the primary ingredients. It's like I tried to make pancakes once. I didn't have any egg and I didn't have any milk. And it wasn't a quick mix, okay? All I had was blueberries, a little bit of yogurt, and like the powder, like flour. I tried to mix it together. I put some cinnamon in there. Those things were flatter than flat, and they tasted horrible, okay? It's like, I will never live that one down in my family. But if we're missing some key ingredients from creation, then I think that that what we create won't have the impact that we hope, right? Which is why Neil Stephenson in his book Snow Crash illustrated or contextualized the metaverse as a dystopian reality. Now, in our understanding, we're trying to make the metaverse something positive, right? But I don't know. I just don't know if that's going to, I don't know that that positive connotation can really be there in the way that the marketing bros hope, without incorporating the knowledge and the technology that's more than hardware and software that has been here since the foundations of time.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
no,
It's
this is
like
the same problem. Oh, good. Sorry. We're so excited. Go ahead, Faith.
thank you. I just really appreciate the point of view, of course. And it's like, if the bros tasted that pancake you made and didn't know how good the pancake could be if it had all the right ingredients, they're just gonna go along with the other pancake that wasn't that good and think it's amazing. So I kind of like that analogy, and I love the way that you transcend the definition of metaverse, and I feel like that is what's missing. So I appreciate a lot. Jeremy?
Yeah, no, I see the same problem actually in the ocean space, and I mean, I spent a lot of time with indigenous cultures in the South Pacific, and turns out they figured this out thousands of years ago. Um, they had a philosophy that they called ridge to reef. They believed that they were responsible for the ridges at the top of the mountains all the way down to the reefs below the ocean. And sometimes I think of us as like the lost boys of Never Never Land, where we're just off doing God knows what, completely, only thinking about the moment, the present, as Lady Phe so eloquently mentioned. And I love how you've mentioned how forever. That's such a wonderful way to kind of conceptualize in this particular topic. Um, but going back to what's cool, I feel like sometimes we've just decided, well, no, we're going to do it a different way because we think this is the cool way to do it, or from a business perspective, we have something to gain from it. But yet, if we had been doing things the way that indigenous leaders have worked for thousands of years, we wouldn't be in this situation. I mean, the country of Hawaii was, they had several million people there. They didn't rely on exports and imports. They were self-sustainable. And now, if you stopped shipping because of this new way that we are operating, they wouldn't be able to last a week. And so I think this conversation is great because I like how Lady Phe, you said I take part in the metaverse, but I think that's a really great way to look at it. It's like, yeah, we can take part in this, but I think maybe just like in the ocean space, it makes sense to kind of go back to the roots and say, well, what is it about this communication or this connectivity piece that we're missing? That needs to be addressed, and I'm grateful that you positioned it this way, because it's not, I haven't really quite thought about the metaverse in this particular space. Obviously I have the ocean space, but I feel like it's kind of the same problem, but presented in a different way.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I know that there's a lot of talk in the kind of fashion and metaverse space about novelty. And I think the kind of counter argument to that is the community aspect of it. And I think that that is something that relates to, you know, showing that there is an appreciation for what has come before, and what is still as relevant and definitely as useful as it once was. I think that in many ways, something that I battle with a lot is the fact that so much of fashion is about novelty. And I think that a lot more appreciation needs to go towards what has already kind of been found and isn't, you know, a brand new, fresh thing that needs to be come out right away and kind of has all of the attention. Like, I think that there's so much more towards, you know, culture and community building in a decentralized space that could be very useful in addressing these conversations, in fashion as well, but also in other communities too.
And before we cycle off, and I do again want to open up the floor if anyone has any questions, so let me do that first. And then I'd like to end with talking about the coral reefs. The underlying, probably pervasive tone of this year's Crypto Fashion Week, are the oceans, but in particular the reef system. I know, Faith, that you have some experience with reefs, and Jeremy, you also have experience with the reef system. So I'd love to close with that discussion. But before we jump in or dive in, does anyone in the audience have a comment, have a question, any feedback on today's discussion? Please raise your hand and join us here with the open mic. Okay, no questions. So yeah, Faith, I'd love to volley over to you to talk about your experience with the reef systems.
Sure, it's an experience I had a few years ago where I was very interested in the concept of biomimicry and understanding organic design systems, I guess. And I was spending a lot of time in the community of 3D printing and additive manufacture, which was, I guess, my intro into fashion tech. And that's where I learned more about how different 3D print technologies can be used to rebuild in various materials, good and bad, coral reef systems from which reefs can regenerate. So I was obviously really inspired by that, but also it left me with many questions, which some of them are still unanswered, about how impactful that work is and at what scale is that conservation happening. So that's really my experience in that space, and I was really so happy to learn that this would be a focus of Crypto Fashion Week. So I would love to hear, maybe from Jeremy, about your insights in this space as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that coral reefs are a challenging one for me. And one, it's hard for me to remain positive. There's a lot that we can do, but if we were to do everything, a dear friend of mine, Tom Chi, former founder of Google X, he's really focused on coral reefs. And in our lifetimes, we've witnessed such vibrant coral reefs gone to complete total wasteland. And it's really kind of the canary in the coal mine of really what's happening in the ocean space. And I think, if we were to do everything, that means fragmentation, coral planting, and I'm an ambassador for the coral gardeners in Tahiti, Moorea. They're doing amazing work, but it's not enough. Everything that we possibly could do, and if we did it at 100%, at best, we will lose 90% of all coral reefs on the planet. That means that we have 10% left. this is a story that goes on and on the planet, by the way. There was a period of time where we lost 90% of all life on the planet, and we are a sum of that 10%. So I think that there is hope, and it is hope that we need to focus on trying to protect that 10% as best as we possibly can. But I also, think that we need to be real. I mean, I remember being at Paris at COP21, at the Paris Agreement, and at that point they were saying that we need to protect 20% of the world's oceans by 2020. As of right this second, we are protecting 2.7% of the world's oceans. That's fully protected. We didn't even come close to 20%. So, if this was the 1980s and the 1970s, I could get into a conversation with you and say, here, these little things that we could all do together would make a massive difference for the coral reef systems. But we're done with little changes in life. What we need is hard, drastic changes that are uncomfortable. And we need to do it like our life depends on it, because our life does depend on it.
So break it down for folks who might be listening and saying, okay, Jeremy, Mr. Ocean, this is what I've tuned into this talk for. Sure, fashion, but I'm actually an environmentalist at heart. What are some of those, action items that are considered, hardcore steps forward?
Yeah, I really feel like advocating change at the very top is the direction to move forward. I think that, a couple of years ago, I tried to get Nike on board with something, and I'll just throw it out here right now publicly because it never went anywhere. I was very frustrated. But I threw out something that said, hey, what a great chess piece would be for you guys as a massive organization in the United States to go to the United States government and say, this is the way that we should move forward to produce fashion in a more sustainable way. And lay out the groundwork, and then therefore making that the possibility for the rest of the companies that operate in the United States. I really feel like some of these things need to go all the way to the top, to the government. And we do that by making noise, but we also do that by going up to these big corporations. And I'm just an average person, but I actually I made a document, and I went to the sustainability director at Nike. Didn't go anywhere, but I'm not giving up either. Another good example of somebody who's done something like this is Cyril Gooch from Parley for the Oceans. He went to Adidas and he has been working with them for a number of years to try to completely change how their production process is, so that they can actually be more focused on this. So I think those are the kind of those hard changes. But again, I don't put the onus, Lady Phe, I don't put the onus on the actual consumer, because we could all change and say, yeah, we vote with our wallets. And to a certain extent, that's true. But it's not going to make those massive system-wide changes that we need. There are several board decisions that could happen, and some of the world's largest companies, and things could change in a matter of months as opposed to decades. And I feel like that's really what we need to do. I mean, if Web3 is so focused on community and decentralization, and we all grow together, all that kind of stuff, great, awesome. Then why don't we focus that energy to something that would be more advantageous and changing the way that we're doing business, because the status quo is what's broken.
Very well said, Jeremy. Thank you for sharing that. Is it possible that you would put that proposal to Nike maybe on mirror.com or mirror.xyz, where maybe we could support your work and support getting this in front of the right people? Because maybe it isn't Nike to do it, but maybe Adidas or another large company might decide to take it on, especially because both Nike and Adidas are now in the Web3 space. I think that perhaps, did you do this recently? As in when they were in Web3?
I did this a couple of years ago, and so the idea was, they said, oh, we're going to do this thing. We got Nike Air, we've got Nike Water. They had all these different things, and me being a nerd and loving Luc Besson, and one of my favorite films was The Fifth Element. I said, why don't we have Nike Element? Because the element that really matters is the human element. And if we could change the human element, then maybe we could actually make an impact on the ecology. And so, yeah, I'm happy to take that document and post it publicly and say, whoever wants to do it, let's do it. But I feel like, we could all do this together. This is something that I think is a really important thing. And you know what, it might even spiral into something else beyond what we originally wrote in that document.
Yeah, it would be neat to have this a similar conference. Maybe it's the next CFW or for Meta Gala, where we've brought together all the chief sustainability officers at huge corporations with politicians to have our own Web3 kind of caucus, so to speak. I like that idea a lot.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, aka Mr. Ocean, Zofia, and Faith for joining us today. This has been a fantastic and very enriching conversation. I appreciate your time, your expertise, your insights, and your ability to be challenged and to rethink some of the positions that you had coming into this, some of the ideas or maybe assumptions even that you had coming into this, being willing to see things from a new perspective and hear from others that you haven't met. I think overall, that's the energy that we need to make change in the world. And overall, that's the energy that will continue to keep us unified and moving together, heart to heart and step in step. Thank you all. We'll see you next time. You can look for these talks at our YouTube, Universe Contemporary, and you can also follow along with Jeremy on his socials. Jeremy, shout your socials out.
Yeah, it's just everywhere. It's at Jeremy McKane, spelled with a K.
Wonderful. Zofia.